This is Dr. Lee Newman, and I would like to welcome all of you to the 2018 Chiropractic Associate Mastery Program webinar series. I am super excited, kind of made a commitment to come back to do these in a live setting again, and to a large extent when I opened up the registration, I guess there's no other way for this to be, but I really attracted my flock. And so all of you that registered for this series of webinars, I've had a relationship with. That's actually not true. A couple of newbies, and I welcome you guys aboard as well. But it's really, I resonate with the docs that I resonate with, and it's been 3 years since I've really gone through this process anew and live. And so I'm excited to have you. This is going to be my brain dump on looking back now. I think that I graduated from Life University 32 years ago today. And so I'm going to talk about my history in just a moment, but looking back now in those 32 years, kind of bring it to you in 7 or 8 lessons. And on the flip side, I kind of set the numbers 25, and I hit that, so we, quote, sold it out. But if you look at the offices represented in this group, just by my guesstimates, we've done well over $18 million and 275,000 visits and 8,000 new patients just in the last 12 months. And so while each of us are on our own island, like for the common good, for the profession, you know, it's an enormous chunk of the profession. And so the next level for most of you, and you've experienced frustration around the topic, which is to be able to leverage your tremendous practice success as well as all the other benefits of developing associates. And so I'm excited to be able to share my view on that. And just for those that do and those that don't know me, what I like to say, and it's been verified, is once Little League didn't work out, and I had one of my Little League teammates post a Little League scorecard from 1972 where I went 2 for 2 and I doubled and homered. So it did happen. But once Little League didn't work out the way that I wanted, there was nothing else I wanted to do other than become a chiropractor. And so I was the second generation. I grew up in it. I would ride my banana bicycle over to my father's office, and like out front he had some hedges, and we'd stash the bike like between the hedges and the office, and I would hang out at my father's office and was really exposed to, you know, how to interact with the public in a chiropractic setting. And because I knew what I wanted to do, I was able to actually accelerate my education, so that in January of 1983, at the age of 20, I started at Life College in Atlanta, now Life University, graduated in June of 86, and they gave Bob Hope, and for those of you that don't know who Bob Hope was, look him up, an honorary DC degree during my graduation, so I've always considered him a classmate. And so that was in 1986. I opened this office, the mothership, right. I was building it out while I was still in school, and I graduated in June. We opened like the week of July 15th. Ultimately built that practice to 500 visits a week, but personally 300 visits a week, hands-on, for 14 years. For those of you that watched the kind of sales video for this, my father practiced kind of 34 years by himself and took 1 week a year off, and that still caused a lot of aggravation. And even, like, I remember as a child, you know, eating dinner at 5 o'clock, and he would go back to the office 3 nights a week and see patients from like 6:30 to 8. And so while I had a great heart to serve people, I didn't want to work like that during my whole career. And so really from 1997 forward, I focused on developing associates. You know, so I personally managed, I saw the main office did an average of 15,000 visits a year for 24 years before I sold it. and I sold it to my associate that had been there for 7 years, and it's still there, right? So Ron Plaucha, I call the transition to be one of the greatest transitions of any small business, any healthcare, any chiropractic office anywhere. So this office next month will start its 33rd year right here. This used to be a dentist. This used to be a diner. This used to be a Thai restaurant, and I'm not even sure what it is now. This used to be an attorney. This used to be a t-shirt printing office and a couple other things. Now it's a comic store, right? And so what you don't see, though, is across the street and at the corner is the optometrist, the second-generation optometrist, and his father practiced there for 64 years, and they've probably been there 75 years now. So it's not the oldest business in the block, but it's well established, and it's served this community now for 33 years. I got 80% at closing. Dr. Ron paid me the other 20%. He continues now in his 8th year, of being a high-producing chiropractor and serving the community. I've built 16 offices. I did have my first failure during this past year, and so still learning lessons. Although 15, including another successful office, 2 other successful offices this year. And so now have sold 14 for cash. My original goal in 1997 was to do 12 offices, right? And so it also illustrates a little bit about goal gap, because once I hit that 12, I never really reset it for myself. But that's kind of my history and why it's worth listening to what I have to say about this topic. Today is going to be a little bit long. In general, I'd encourage you every other week, 11:30 on Thursdays, be on time. It's always going to be the same link, but you'll still get a ton of emails from me. I would encourage you not to multitask. So I think that there's a big payoff for mastering this topic. And so if you could eliminate the background noise, both to help you and help us, kind of be focused and not multitask. If I ask you to participate, think about participating. Of course, if you do participate, you're giving me permission to use your voice and likeness. Thank you. If you have a webcam and mic, you can join that way, right? I'm sharing mine. It's kind of a new thing. I'm not seeing anybody, though, so maybe no one's sharing theirs. I plan on kind of doing this in a carousel. If there's other docs out there that should be hearing this message, of course, I appreciate when you pass on my name. And lastly, be looking for my asterisks. And if you are taking notes, which I don't think that you need to do, these are going to be recorded. I kind of want you to digest, but if you're a note taker, my asterisks tend to be interesting points to pay attention to. So I sent you all yesterday, the day before, the quiz to lesson 1. Each lesson, it's cool to review the quiz before and just see where your headspace is. It gives you points to listen to during the lesson, and then actually take the time after the lesson to complete the quiz, and feel free to email it to me. And I really think that this will greatly assist in the learning process, in digesting what I want to share about associates, right? And so today may end up being longer than an hour, right? I want to talk overview, the real need to have associates. Again, reviewing my chiropractic algebra, how to run a business, a chiropractic practice. I have 7 rules for successful associates. We're going to talk about 4 levels of associates, and then I have 1 or 2 success stories that I built in. And so the first thing to consider is there's kind of 3 levels of high volume or high profit or high service practices. High volume single doc, right? And so he or she is running, and like in 2018, 300 a week is kind of a large number. Occasionally you'll still hear the mega numbers of like 1,000 or 1,200 or 2,000 a week. And for the single docs, I think that to do 2,000 a week by yourself at this point, that probably there's too many corners that get cut. But even just the 300 visit a week, single doc office, probably with 2 or 3 CAs, certainly doing a great service in the community and a great business, it can be a solid practice, right? The next level is that doc brings in an associate, and you go from 3 to 5 or 6 or 700 visits in a single office. Or you go with the first associate to 400 visits and then to 550 visits with 2 associates. And so all of today, and be thinking about this please, is about defining what you want to build. And so all of you have achieved great success in your life. And so I would encourage you even to take a pen and paper and start writing down, what are all my great achievements, right? And then think about what you needed to do to reach those achievements. And so some of them were innate, some of them were your given talents, and some of them you had to work hard to get to where you had to go. And it's this combination of everything that we can bring to associates and really experience a next level by working with other chiropractors. And so finally, the third level would be high volume, multi-doc, multi-office. And so I've run 6 offices at once. I've run 5 offices at once for multiple years. I also feel that perhaps it was a limit. And if I was going to run 12 offices at once, I would probably need to have a different structure. But I never needed to do that, or by design, I never expanded out to do that. And we'll talk about what my cycle is shortly. And so it's to think about exactly what you want to create within either the 4 walls of your office or the 8, 12, 16, 24 walls of your office, right? The system is reproducible. So working with many clients for many years, helping them both work with associates next to them, and even for a small handful select clients, doing satellite offices that ultimately were successfully sold to associates. And so both I and them, we've made tons of mistakes, learned from the mistakes. You will still make more mistakes, but there's a embedded learning here. And then also, I strongly believe this, right? I'm comfortable with my assets and what I'm strong in, but I am convinced that if I can do it, you can do it as well if you bring your skill set to it and really undertake it with really the red hot burning desire that you've done in building a practice, but to really see what you can do with associates. And so you don't need to reinvent the wheel. I often, the old ones of these are recorded, and so I will go back, and when I listen to the lessons, I get to coach myself. And there's many lessons where I'm just in full agreement, shaking my head, and so I think it still stands up. And so working through a history of associates, really I think that it's still this way. The general model is you hire an associate, he or she works for 1 or 2 years, they learn what they want to learn, they see some patients, they help you out and doing some exams, they cover for you when you're busy or you go away for the short time that you go away, and then they go away. And this is done repetitively, and for lots of docs it gives them enough that it gives them the flexibility that they're looking for. And they can service more people than by themselves by having this associate, but it's not really designed for a big win for everybody. In the setting, the associate is commonly known kind of as a drone, where the senior doc is still responsible for generating all the new patients, maybe even making all the bonding day 1, day 2, the financial agreement, the care schedule agreement. And the associate, under a positive, can help facilitate the visits. And so you're going to get the best out of both of us, Mr. Patient, Dr. Associate, and I are both experts. We're both going to see you, and the associate can see a lot of visits, which can help. But again, I think there's a next level. Oftentimes in the associateship relationship like that, what it means to be working is not well defined. And so it leaves this mutual frustration where the associates don't feel that they're getting to the next level, being appreciated, even being paid correctly, which we're going to talk about. And the senior doc doesn't feel that the associate is contributing to the practice. And so that is the usual kind of relationship that ends up. And so I'm talking about something completely different where everybody wins. Again, I think there's different types of even how to work with other chiropractors. And so the whole independent contractor concept, in a true independent contractorship, you essentially would just be renting out your office, and some other chiropractor would be building his or her own practice within your four walls. And for me, it just never made sense to give up any capacity that I could own and control and do through an employee, right? I think the other paths, there are chiropractors either with or without licenses that are just exam docs. There are others that just do fill-in work, or they're a 6 hour a week. They work for you 2 shifts a week. And, I would ask all of you what your experience was working through an associateship, just coming up for air, welcoming everybody and saying hi. Anybody have a positive or negative experience of being an associate? Yes, sir. Thank you. And that's the way that it should be. But I might even make the argument that he ended up losing a great asset that he helped to develop, and so there could have been a next level for him even where you both continued to win. Does that make sense? Hey, Ryan. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. I think some of my associates are on this call as well, or they're going to be. So, it's the same thing. So, all right, I'm remuting. Go ahead. Wait. Go ahead, Ryan. Yeah. Those are all great experiences. Anyone have a negative experience? Not that we have to have that, but I'm sure you've all heard of them. And so, hang on. Hey, Ryan. So it was even Steven, right? And so, I think there's a wide range of experiences. And so I'm going to start to make this other argument of why we should be thinking about, why we should be thinking about having associates. And so first off, and always foremost for me, is this problem, right? So this is the random pharmacy near you and the random pharmacy near me waiting to fill 600 prescriptions a day. And you can't convince me otherwise than every single one of these people, as well as everyone else that's living and breathing, needs to be in relationship with one of us. And so, kind of regardless of how big you are individually, adding other sets and having a positive line from Dr. Smith to Dr. Hansen to Dr. Coogan to Dr. Austin, right? That's all, that's all the experience on the tight wire, right? And so it's helping more people in each of our communities, right? I talk about a thumbprint. And so now in Western Pennsylvania, we're going to talk about the practice. The first practice I think I sold in 2001. And so, that's 17 years ago. But there's now 15 practices there that are delivering, to enormous number of people visits. And, that's part of why I did what I did. Be more systematized so that, it's never going to be not about personality, but it's using a strong system, and it almost will multiply any positive personality. And for many associates, the system can be strong enough for them to find their personality. We just need to instill it both as culture and then individually training and managing all the time. Why have associates? To both these two things together. Not only to just earn more money, but to be able to earn money from the production of others. In the next slide, we're going to do a little quickie exercise, right? And so when you can earn production and real profits from the production of others, then we earn a real true work-life balance and more flexibility and all of those things. But I would argue that there's even this third vein of why have associates, or a fourth vein, right? Or whatever it is. And it's your skill, right? Again, Dr. Gibson to Dr. Smith to Dr. Hansen to Dr. Coogan to Dr. Austin, right? And, certainly we could all make this argument that the profession is in serious trouble. And so by having a growing number of offices that we've molded, or even just a growing number of docs that we've interacted with next to us, or even just the one long-term employee doc that we've been able to provide a career for, will help the profession. And so it's this multi-dynamic benefit by really making this happen, right? And so, be more profitable. And so, just looking at an associate running at 100 visits a week, and if that was just added as a separate module onto your current practice, how much more would that mean in revenues and then ultimately profits? And then the question is, why is helping more people and having higher profits so important? And I think that it's, critical. First is for all the docs still in the debt cycle of wealth accumulation, is to be able to annihilate debt. And so we have this ability still, even with $500,000 in debt, right? If you built a big $1 million a year practice with one or two docs next to you, you'd be able to be debt free in 3 to 5 years if you plan for it. And then for all of us are somewhere on this continuum. And so, being 32 years in, it's kind of scary. But I would ask all of you at whatever the time frame that's appropriate, but this is 2018, and so, another 22 years is 2040 or 2045, I did the exercise. Where do you want to be financially in 2045? And so, having 20 years of leveraged income is linear growth in accumulating wealth. And so really creating true work-life balance. This was after the 12-hour flight to Hawaii on my birthday. I had a 30-hour birthday that year, right? And so the 10 days I was in Hawaii, that practice I showed you at the beginning, had a best week of the year week. And so it can really happen to where you can build whatever schedule you want and be able to maintain and even grow your numbers. In contrast to my father that never really mastered that, right? And so, you can build real family time, or if you're into travel or other things in the community or with your significant other or playing golf by yourself, even building up at my age and maybe even older, retiring in practice, you giving up the lion's share and just going in 12 hours a week, and retiring in practice. And then it also adds this extra insurance around disability. We're going to talk about disability at some point in this course. But, if you became disabled right now, what would happen both to your practice, your patients, and your finances? And so having a successful associate is additional insurance. And so yet, either all or very many, most of you are here because it's a difficult assignment, right? The right associate can change your life. And so we've heard both sides of it. And so I would encourage you to create all the success psychology stuff about your associate program. So a vision board, right? An actual list wherever you kind of brainstorm or doodle. So whether it's a journal or something digital or an audio recorder or the notes on your phone or wherever it might be, to come up with 100 individual reasons of why working with an associate is so important. And it's an interesting exercise because there's all kinds of different streams that flows from that, right? There's the service, there's the money, there's the lifestyle, there's the profession. And so there's tons of reasons. And here's the first asterisk, right? We want to be this magnet of attraction. And what I would ask you is how strong does this magnet need to be? And so I would argue that it needs to be super strong. But if you create it, if you get clear on what you want and then develop the plan and go after it, just like everything else that you've already achieved in your life, you can succeed working with associates. And so the exercise becomes, right, what is life like not successfully developing associates as opposed to successfully developing associates over the next however many years that is. Right? And so when you're by yourself, there's always a limited number of people, which limits your income and it restricts your work-life balance, right? And you don't ever leverage your success, and every single dollar of income that you earn over the next whatever number of years is directly, not attacked, but attached to your hands, right? And so I call that the golden handcuffs of success. Right? And when you sometimes complicate on top of that kind of a large lifestyle, the house, the cars, the toys, the trips, the educations, and everything else, right? The practice is super successful, but like the money, you always have this financial pressure around money. Obviously, you have pressure around money, right? As opposed to when you crack this code, right, first off, we have an unlimited number of patients that we can serve. When you can find, train, and manage associates, there's an unlimited number of people to serve. And again, whether you do it in one office or more, doing 1,000 new patients a month in one office, you could certainly declare that victory, spike the ball in the end zone, and do your end zone celebration. Right, and do $3 million in one practice. That would be way cool. Or across, a big city with multiple offices. And so with a successful associate, you can generate income through the work of others. Right? And if you're the only licensed DC, even if there's other people that are generating income for you, it all happens because of you. Right? And so you can also create real work-life balance. And while I don't recommend it, but I've coached a couple of docs even through like 6-month sabbaticals. They make the practice so strong that when they leave, it can withstand them not being around for 6 months. And when they came back, it wasn't quite as strong, but it was still super viable, and they were able to quickly rebuild it, right? And so, or to, work 3 days a week if that's what you want. And I'm not necessarily recommending that, but you could end up building whatever work-life balance that you want, and really also leverage your primary skill or primary marketable skill, right? Being able to develop your chiropractic practice is an enormous level of success. And so we should be able to leverage that in and of itself. And so that drives me back to my chiropractic algebra. For any of you that have been exposed to me, this is how I manage my offices. This top line is the basic foundation of the business. Your collections equals the number of new patients that you have, multiplied by PVA, the number of times you've seen them, multiplied by the OVA, what you collect per visit. And so looking at a trailing monthly average is most meaningful. And so if you had the last 12 months, or even now, next week or the week after is 6 months into the year. And so those are real numbers. How many average monthly new patients do you have? What's your PVA year to date? What's your OVA year to date? And that would be, if you did your monthly new patients, that would be your monthly collections. And so to work that for you, and then for the associate, and then overall for the practice. And that's how I constantly manage. And so if you had 25 new patients and you had a PVA of 25 and you collected $50 a visit, you collect $31,000 a month. And there's a couple of docs on this call kind of at this level. And so getting here, there's nothing, there's a big star on your forehead for this practice. $370,000 a year, right? Probably close to $200,000 in profit. That's a sexy practice. But look at the effort, just going from 25 to 25 to 30 to 30, there's like 50% more cash, which is probably way more than 50% profit, right? So now we're at 530 we're at 540 a year collected. And so there's probably $240,000, $340,000 in profit. And then the $1 million level at just $50 a visit would be 50, 40, and 50. And I know a lot of you out there are way over 50 at this point, but some of you aren't, right? But, at $70, this is 2,000 visits a month. So at $70 a visit, it would be $140,000 a month, which is, $1.68 million a year. Again, as we dive down into the business, all of this is in service, right? It's how we measure how we're delivering on our mission, changing the spine one world at a time. And so I'm always comfortable talking about it in business numbers. And so one of the homework assignments is to develop yours, right? What should the offices be? What should yours personally be? What should the associates be, right? And so here's my cycle. Create something worth replicating. You've all done that. Systematize it. You all probably are perpetually working on that. Here's the key. Find other DCs that want and can reproduce it, right? And so there's many that either want, there's many that want that can't, and there's many that don't want. And so we need to find the docs that want and can reproduce it. Once we find them, though, we need to train them. We need to manage them. And we need to typically do it right next to you for some period of time so that we gain the skill of training and managing. And so, the first time you really hit that head on, it can be jarring. But what's the value to the associate watching 20 of your report of findings in a row? At the same time, the first time you do that, what does it feel like to you to have the associate watch you do 20 report of findings in a row? And so there's a little bit of uncomfortableness to work through there, but who you become in that process is much stronger. And it's one of the things that the hiring any associate should do. which is make you better immediately, right? And so train and manage them right next to you. And then if you have the red hot burning desire to learn to train and manage them off-site in another office. And so again, this is for the few, the brave, the Marines. It doesn't need to be for you, but if it is for you, managing off-site is an advanced skill of managing them right next to you. And to be able to identify like when you need to either show up or ask the right questions and get the result. And then for me, if I'm going to do this, is to then, here's my goal, is I would like to sell my associate a practice where they can earn $200,000 a year from the day that they buy the practice and service thousands of patients, right? And so the way that I language it, even on the first phone call, is I would like for an associate to be able to buy a practice in 3 to 5 years where he or she can earn $200,000 the day that they start buying, so that we create this win-win-win relationship. They win, they end up in professional success, and there is anything far from a guarantee that they can become successful by not working with you. And so this is a really important point. So oftentimes I will get asked, why would an associate go through this? And so the first issue is this, is that the chance of them being successful ever in practice is frankly remote. But the chance of them being successful after having a successful relationship with you is tremendous. And so that's a valuable experience for the right doc. So they end up owning a big, thriving practice. We end up selling them the practice, and the community ends up being served, for essentially ever and ever. So it creates this win-win-win cycle, right? And so here are my rules on how I've thought about it when I've done it successfully. And so right off the get-go, I used red. It means it's important. Rule number 1, do nothing to damage the mothership. The mothership is your practice. The practice that you've currently built. If you have an associate and you're adding a second associate or a third, then it's the current practice. And as you expand, you do nothing to damage the mothership. So the associate does not get your referrals, your internet patients, or anything else that you've got a direct line to, right? In fact, your practice must expand right from the beginning. And so when the symptom of a bad associate program is 30 days after the associate is hired, the practice is smaller than it was 30 days ago, right? And I talk about a free hire somewhere. And so here's the way that I think about this, is one of the numbers that I want to know on my practice every month is what's my monthly profit for the practice. And so whatever the number is, right, let's say it's $30,000 a month. And so if I hired an associate and out the door it cost me $5,000, and it doesn't necessarily need to, but if it does, right, so even though my overhead goes up $5,000, the first 30 days out, I want to make sure that my profit is over my $30,000 average. And so I averaged, I had $33,000 in profit, even though I spent $5,000 more in overhead, but the profit was up. And if it's right, so we need to develop the program of onboarding so that the first 30 days the associate contributes, and like they get used to that to being a standard, right? And so there's this caveat: if you want to hire an associate and disappear, I'm probably not for you. This program's probably not for you. I don't believe anybody on this call is like that, so it doesn't matter. Yes, Victor, that my PVA calculation is total visits divided by total new patients. And you're only a new patient once in my office, right? So that gives you the real raw number. I have a lot of, I think about PVA in 4 quadrants, everything up to conversion, delivering the initial the 36 visits of corrective care, and then the supportive care part or maintenance, and then going back and bringing people back that have discontinued. And that does highlight that the chat is open if you have other chat questions or comments. So rule number 1, do nothing to damage the mothership. Rule number 2, have an exit strategy. And so this is something that I'll ask the senior docs when they say they want to work with associates, right? How does the relationship with your associate end where everybody's happy? And so this is starting with the end in mind. And so one is like they stay, they produce, and they move away and do it on their own, and I'm happy, they're happy. Okay, if that's what everybody wants. 2 is as well, they don't leave. They stay long term and they're happy and producing, and that's what I'm looking for. And that's cool too. I had an associate that worked for me for 13 years and has gone on now to build her own office, and it's all good. Learn and partner. And so I've just had a couple of these happen in the last year. And so if you want, and particularly with our practices, they're so large that finding one buyer at one time could be a challenge for the main office. And so you can end up selling a big practice to an associate in different kind of stanchions along the way. And so they can stay in partner, or they can learn and end up buying either the main office or a satellite. And so there's a question that I'll ask on the interview, where do you want to be professionally in 3 to 5 years? And so their answer needs to match my answer, not vice versa. And so it doesn't mean that there's a right or wrong answer, but this is our program or your program. And so you need to decide what you're looking for and then go find that person. And so if you want someone to stay long term, it's going to be a different person that, I want to be in my own office and by 5 years out, I want to have my own successful office. And again, neither is right or wrong. It's just a different person. And I want you to get what you want. Rule 3, hire doctors that have a chance to succeed. So as I was just talking about, they must want what we've agreed to want. And so, I always talk about 200 visits a week. I would want my associates, if they grow the satellite practice to 200 visits a week, they're going to end up owning a highly successful practice and, a sweet deal, and everyone lives happily, and I have all these offices out there that show it. And so my real frustration is, of the 15 docs that have gone through it, there's probably 7 or 8 that are really happy doing 110 visits a week. And they're really happy living happily ever after, right? I would just argue that that's not what I want to work with docs that want to do at least 200 visits a week, right? They have to be successful there's 5 success factors. And going back to my cheat sheet, right? So, and we'll talk about this next lesson in interviewing, right? But they have to have self-initiative. They have to have the concept of flawless execution. They have to be able to provide leadership. They have to be able to generate new, build retention, collect for their visits, and they have to be adaptable as we do all the time, right? Here's where it is. The free hire, I already talked about this. 30 days out after you hire your doc, even though your overhead goes up, your profit should have gone up even more. So you should have more profit 30 days out, even though you're paying for the doc. Here's some red flags. First off is mismatch philosophy. Doc, how many visits do you think it takes for your average patient before maintenance? And when they say 8 visits, they basically can never work for me. And so I know most of you are in agreement with that, or at least practice in, close to what my model is. I would say most patients generically, I'd be comfortable recommending a 36 visit care plan. There'd be some that were less and some that were more. In fact, there'd be many that, doing a second set of 36 visits, I could certainly justify well. And if the prospective associate believes that, really anything more than 8 or 10 visits is outside the mainstream and what they warned us about for 4 years at chiropractic school, right? It's never going to be a successful relationship, right? For me, if they have poor credit, then they won't be able to get a loan when it becomes time for them to get a loan. And it's also indicative that they haven't been good about their money. So pretty much all of them are going to have a lot of debt, but you can still have a lot of debt and have reasonable credit. If they have poor credit, then, I want to explore that and see why that is, right? So sometimes there could be a legitimate reason for that, but oftentimes they've mismanaged student loan money, and that would kind of be a red flag for me, right? Certainly the docs that know more than you and they want to practice their way, right? So that's going to be a red flag. And so recruiting becomes the key essential tool of finding docs that have a chance to succeed. Rule 4, train your associate. 30% of a blue-collar executive's time is spent in training, but seldom does a chiropractor spend 30% of his or her time in training. Everything can be trained, and so it's our job. In fact, the associates are looking always for the next thing and feel that they're still learning. And so one of the anchors for associates to stay is that there's always the next thing for them to learn, for them to master, to have resources to implement, right? And so I would identify all of the areas that you have frustrations that you need the associate to produce in, and then generate the training. And basically, it's training around generating new patients, right? So what's the screening close, right? You're developing meetings with an attorney. You said you'd like to work together, and then the attorney said, and right, so all the way down to nitty-gritty stuff, right? Even the paperwork. Docs that don't do the paperwork will not do the paperwork forever. And so, this is a frequent thing to look for, right? The SOAP notes are never done on time. The reports are not done on time. There's no diagnosis in the computer. And so you need to have both the training and then systems and checklists in place, and to be able to eliminate as many of these negatives as you possibly can. Rule 5, right? Manage the associates daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. So I've had an interesting experience over the last almost 2 years. So I told you about my first failed office, and it was really, I think I ended up giving up on it too early, to tell you the truth, right? I was in a different situation, but basically it's all about the docs. But the last 2 years, both Dr. Doyle and Dr. Megan, they both might even be on this call, and we've been doing powwows at least 3 days a week, pretty much Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, pretty much every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the last 2 years. And both of those practices essentially went from 0 to 200, both, really super successful in Western Pennsylvania. Dr. Dan has gone on to, he bought in November, and he's having a killer first year. And Dr. Megan, in 18 months or whatever it is in a position to transition into ownership. And so it's daily. It's every other day powwow. It's daily emails. It's weekly meetings. I would say that, in the olden days, I did monthly inspections where I showed up, and I was the delinquent one here and really didn't do this. But certainly it makes sense. And again, even next to you, it makes sense to have this matrix in. And so we'll talk about this in lesson 4, I believe. Rule 6, keep the associate motivated, right? And so it's all about, this is the prize and the carrot and the stick, right? And so we always want to coach them to the next level, right? We want to keep their eye on the prize and then check their thermometers. And just like it is for every senior doc, it's the same way for the associates. It's about their internal thermometer. And how bad do they want what we've defined and said that, 200 visits a week? How bad do they want that? And if they're willing to do whatever it takes, just like you and I did and still do, they too can join the club. And in fact, the truth of the matter is there's no other way for them to get there. There is no shortcut to give them. And so if they want to join the warrior level, 200 visits a week, right? And imagine that right next to you. I can think of a couple of docs where that would be way cool, right? And so it's about their thermometer and their internal drive. Rule 7, right? Add discipline when necessary. And be super tough earlier, right? Timeout chair, right? And so they're 5 minutes late on day 3, right? They don't look right physically, shaven or dress or shoes or whatever, or, whatever it is. And so that we have this culture of doing the right thing, the right way, the right time, over and over and over and over and over. And those are steps to success, right? Correct any mistakes. Also acknowledge what's right, but have tough discipline. And, the discipline lightens up when they produce. And, a superstar producer, I want to work with. I want to, if there's yellow, magenta, and then red, still any red line violation would need to be dealt with accordingly. So you have a super producer and there's, some the felonious charge of any sort, they need to be out. But if they're late, or, something else happens around that, I might still have a conversation, but the production is what drives the less discipline. This is my first satellite office. It's a kind of a cute story, right? In 1997, I had practiced kind of in the inner city for, 11 years. Had, again, reached 500 visits a week, and I decided that I wanted to do multiple offices, and had an associate next to me that was ready to go. And this facility, this sign was on the building and had already been a chiropractic office. And so but it had been vacant for some period of time. But, it is what it looks like. It wasn't elaborate. It was not the Taj Mahal. But, we took it over. We put this sign on. I had a doc in there. We had a tremendous opening right from the beginning. Right, so these are our new patients in the first however many weeks, and this is office visits, 126 visits like in the 12th or 13th week, right? But I made several mistakes, I learned a lot of lessons, and ultimately I fractured the relationship with that doc. That doc left. It was kind of one of the greatest falling forwards or succeeding by failure. So ultimately, 2 docs later was Dr. Shannon. And so she actually graduated on a Sunday, had her Pennsylvania license in her hand on the following Wednesday, took over this office, and has grown it to be one of the largest practices in the country, but certainly in Western Pennsylvania for the last 16 years or 17 years she's owned it. She moved out of this facility a couple years after buying it and was in the second facility for over 10 years and just recently moved again into the Taj Materhof, and it's a big, huge facility, and I'm always proud of her. And that's the other thing that becomes important is all of these success stories, as Dr. Hansen and Dr. Coogan shared us in the beginning, right? And so here are my levels of associates. So my level 0 would be a non-licensed doc, could be an intern, right? Could be, I guess, even like someone that was interested in going to chiropractic, or even somebody not interested in going. And then it becomes of what activities can they do. So if you get a student intern, a preceptorship, we could build a program for 12 weeks of what we'd want that person to do, or however many weeks we have them, right? Level 1 would be my new patient assistant. Again, this could be licensed or unlicensed, and it depends on your locality and what they can and can't do. But if you could have a doc that did exams and x-rays and then assisted you in all of the other stuff that you wanted assistance in, that could be a first level. And then, so while they're training, they're my new patient assistant. So they're doing my exams, my x-rays, my paperwork, they're out marketing, they're generating new patients for the office. And when they achieve X, Y, and Z, and basically that's they can do day 1 to my satisfaction, they can do day 2 to my satisfaction, they can adjust good enough to start seeing patients, and they've produced 20 new patients into the office, right? Then they become a treating doc, right? And so at this point, they're still my new patient assistant, but now they're starting to build their own practice. When they reach 150 visits a week, they become a senior doc. They are no longer my new patient assistant. And that number could be different in your office depending on the OVA that's involved. But, so even if it's 100 visits a week, right? So at that point, it's the self-answer of when to hire the next doc. And so really, in the 3-doc model, this is an old Dr. Gibson saying that he taught us early on, right? So with the first associate, patients can ask, they're still going to ask for you. And by the second associate, they can never ask about you. He had a better way of putting it, but so that with 2 associates, and that becomes when you can hire. And so you can hire the second associate when the first associate is never going to not bonus. You can hire the second associate when the first associate is never going to not bonus. And so that ends up being something like 100 visits a week. Right? And so at that point, it's just pushing for them to build their own practice. And so pushing to get them to 200 visits a week forever right next to you. Or as a jumping to a next office. Either is great. If they go into their own office, then they're a clinic director. And then ultimately they buy the clinic and they're a clinic owner. And it's kind of how I think about it. So I guess I do go through this. Level 0 intern. They observe, they learn, they produce. Level 1, they generate their own news. This would be here too, right? So again, in my system, I want the associate to learn how to do everything. And so sometimes it feels like it's a punishment, or the associate doesn't feel like that they should, it doesn't, and that's a bad sign, right? You have to go out and get new patients. You have to be able to build retention. You have to be able to sell. And you have to be able to collect, and so the associate needs to be responsible for that. And so I even connect them to their own billing. And so I might have a CA still do it, but they're still connected and need to answer all the clinical questions and need to be able to answer to me how we're going to get paid. And as you know, every single patient has their own story on how that is, but they're still my new patient assistant. When they bonus for 3 months, they're no longer my new patient assistant, and we continue to manage and motivate them. When they're over 600 visits a month, they become a senior doc, and then after 3 to 6 months, they're ready for their own office, right? Clinic director, sell the office, right? So at $30,000 a month, and I've done it at less than that, but at $30,000 a month, it becomes a win-win. And so the goal for me, again, is when the associate buys the practice, is that assuming they do the same volume the first month that they buy it, they end up making double what they made as an employee the month before. And so I'll get asked this question, why not just keep a bunch of practices going and get the income from them, or even some percentage of them? Well, we're going to talk about that in detail in further lessons, but the question back to you is, docs that can grow their own $30,000 a month or more practice, what do they want? And if you didn't say they want to own their own practice instantly, you didn't really think about the question correctly. And so the docs that have done it and are doing it and can do it, they want to own their own practice. But it's good for us too, because we convert and cash out the risk of running a business into the huge reward of the buyout. And so it becomes highly profitable. It's how we leverage our personal success. And then there's some tax advantages as well. But again, what happens for the associate is they learn all aspects of how to run and build a successful practice, right? they can get there in a not only shorter period of time, but more reliable that they're ever going to make it period of time. And again, they can end up owning a practice that generates $200,000 a year in income, again, with more guarantee and shorter time. This is Dr. Dan Nugent. He actually had a reasonably successful practice, or he had a successful practice in Virginia, but his wife is a Western Pennsylvania-er, and she convinced him to move to the greater Pittsburgh area, and he was able to take over a practice and in less than 18 months build it up, buy it, and he's been there well over a decade, and it's happily ever after, and now they got 2 even older kids now, and it's the great transition. What happens to you is that you get to build whatever life you want. And so first is that we have this ever-growing unlimited capacity of service, which tied to that now is increased profits through the production of others. And so you can then at that point decide what you want to do. And so for me, I always had this great desire to live in New York City. And those of you that understand that. And those of you that don't understand that won't ever understand that. And that's okay too. And so like it's the water skiing boat or the beach house or whatever. And so this is Central Park. It's my favorite 660 acres in the world. And I've lived both on this side of it. I currently, from where I'm talking, I'm right about here. And it's a glorious day. And I will go out today and walk in the park. And it's where I want to be. And yet I was able to successfully manage 2 offices and still one. And, so we get to live the life that we want to live. At some point, you can plan for and then transition out of actually seeing patients. And so you want to stay active day to day in the management, you can do that. If you even just want to, you can actually step out and do that remotely. If you're going to totally kind of retire, then you should probably sell it. But again, we can grow our own buyer. And lots of the money that we end up getting in the sale of a practice is taxed at a capital rates gain. And so it's another reason to sell the practice, particularly the satellites. But instead of being taxed at what could be 40% still, it only gets taxed at 20%. Excuse me. So every $100,000 after tax, there's a $20,000 difference. And so that adds yet another reason for successful sales. But again, having your one or more associate kind of uncaps the number of people that we can see. Thinking back about that pharmacy picture, it's really the thumbprint that drives me. I do love the business, but again, I want to connect it. That business is all about a measurement about how well we can deliver our mission in our communities, right? 2 or more docs, you can market nonstop. Dr. Dan had the health fair at the large high school in his area. We've done it for a bunch of years. We got a bunch of great relationships. They love when we do it. He did a great job. The challenge is, 8 or 9 years into doing the event, he only got a small handful of new appointments. Yet it's still worth doing the event for all of the connections and the relationships. But if he had an associate where he didn't have to shut for 6 hours on a Wednesday to do that, it would be a much more productive event. And so the sum is truly greater than the parts. And so having that first successful and then multiple successful docs right next to you gives you unlimited capacity, right? Increased profits. So remember that the last dollars are all profit. And so at 200 visits a week at $60 a visit, it's $600,000. Let's say it's 50% overhead. At 300 visits a week with 2 docs at $60 a visit, it's $900,000. And even if the profit ends up only being $450, right? If there's an extra $100,000 to the associates, right? It's still 50% more profit for just, well, it's 50% more visits, but it's still only 100 more visits. And so do the math in your office with your numbers, and it's quite dramatic. So if we can find the right docs and service the right people, we can have these unbelievable businesses. And to a large extent, this is killer important. To a large extent, it's all of the negative mental stuff that each of us carry on why we can't do whatever it is that, why can't you have a $2 million practice? It's all of this negative mental stuff, and it's being able to free as much of it as you can to hit that next level, and it's dramatic, right? And so from there, you can increase flexibility. Immediately, extra half day off, lots of 4 or 5 day weekends, a true 2-week family vacation, going to your kid's Little League game or whatever the equivalent is, right? So that you're not eating dinner and then rushing back to the office to see another 25 people from 6 to 8, right? And then when it's time, it's the right way to transition out of seeing patients, right? And so you could retire in practice where you see the less number and the associates see the higher number, or you could retire or stop seeing patients totally and just run it as a business, or you actually could take the time to grow your own buyer over 3, 5, 7 years and sell a monster practice, right? And so this is what I was talking about, converting income to capital gains. So this is now 20%, and consult your tax advisor, but a lot of it is capital gains, which is good. And so here's the necessary skill. I talked about it earlier, and I want to reinforce this, right? The necessary skill that you and I need to develop and always further kind of grow on is getting production from others. And so it's completely different than doing it yourself. And so again, in the real world, it's generating new patients, So you screen the person, exactly what went on. What questions did you ask? How did you do the screening? How did you explain it? What was the close? They said what? You said what? Right? You did a talk. Take me through the talk. How did you close? You met with an attorney. Where's your Facebook ad? And so being that manager, you did a report of findings. Well, how many visits did you recommend? Did you record it? Let's review it together. Right? Tell me about collections on all of these people. And so managing that and having another doc doing all that is different than doing it yourself. So learning how to train, how to manage, how to motivate, how to support, how to discipline our key employees become this skill that we need to master. And so going all the way back to the E-Myth Revisited, where Gerber talks about the producer, the manager, and the entrepreneur. And so we're all of that. And so how many times would the manager be the one that gets fired? And that's predominantly the case. And so it's the skill that we need to work on. So, that's an area of self-development for all of us, is how to become a better manager of people. And so this is another thought that I actually had today, and I'll be done in probably about 5 minutes. Develop your personal assistant, right? And so it's truly an office manager or even an inner office manager. I'll laugh sometimes in an 80-visit chiropractic a week office. This is Susie, my office manager. It was like, you might need a CA, but she's not your office manager. But in a big, 400 visit a week office, or even 300 visit a week office, or multiple offices, having this right-hand person is critical. And I was fortunate enough to develop a relationship, and I had Lisa next to me for 23 years. And when that ended, I now have had Beth since and was able to transition that, and it's become an important tool to have. And typically, this person, she does whatever it is that you need done and don't want to personally do. And so having that person that can do that becomes important. She becomes the HR department. And as we go down the road of 2018, and forward, there's more of these HR issues, having the work employment signs, having the policy manual, and all of the things that come up around this that nobody ever talks about, right? First line of management to all staff, even the DCs. And so not clinically, and you have a direct line, but how the DC looks, how the DC is talking to people, the on time or not, other assignments, even holding DCs accountable to scripts, right? So having this person next to you is really important. Making sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted, right? And it's beneficial to have this person in a long-term role. Lastly is, this skill, it's been a great frustration for lots of us. And so creating this mastermind is important. Share your dreams in safety. Encourage, excite, and challenge, and accountability. So I created this Facebook group. This link obviously does you no good here, but I will send you an email for it. So it's the new private group on Facebook. And so we can share success and stories in there. And I encourage you to do that. I'm also going to create some other resources for some sharing amongst the group. And so your homework for this lesson 1 is complete the lesson 1 quiz that you should have by now. Develop your vision for your associate program, not my vision for your associate program. I'm happy to have any conversation with you about it, but really work on developing what your vision is. What do you have to be? What do you have to do? What do you have to have? And then to connect to that, the formulaic algebra of what the office needs to be, what the associates need to be, and kind of where it is and how do we close the gap. How do we add 10 new patients and 7 visits of PVA and $6 a visit? And if you did that, what does that create? And so that's the homework. I'd like to hear some takeaways, and then we can wrap up for day 1. Let me just see if Dr. Fenn, are you out there, sir? A takeaway, a share, a thought, a question, a comment. And so what overcomes the big ask? But the big gain. And so really going back, creating a vision board, creating 100 different reasons why having a successful associate is important, and really looking at those and seeing the picture and the feeling. And so for those of you that have not experienced this, the right associate can change your life. Dr. Shannon changed my life. I think she would argue I changed hers as well, but she changed my life for sure. And Dr. Doyle changed my life. He bought in November, right? So what Dr. Megan continues, she's my current associate, changed my life. Thank you. Dr. Sage, I don't know if you can talk. Can you talk? Maybe not. There you go. Sorry. A share, a takeaway. I call it. And it applies to everybody on this call, right? We're better for them to work than right next to you. Think about that they could end up in a horrible situation, right? So, good one. Dr. Hill? And so it just jars my memory. I told you that first office, I fractured the relationship with the doc that was at 127 visits in 12 weeks. And so I did not set the sales price for the practice prior to opening. And so once we were successful, I told him that if he grew the practice to here, the sale price would be here. And if he grew to here, then the sale price would be... And so he was working against himself. And so I learned that whole lesson. And so that. Dr. Carr, I see you, but... can you speak, Dr. Carr? Yes, sir. Right, so it's heavy training, and so you still can develop lots of people where it would be appropriate for her to be the primary doc. And so it's doing all the things necessary. If it's about adjusting, you can teach somebody how to adjust. It's not my favorite thing to do, but you can definitely do it, and it is a favorite thing for lots of docs to teach. But basically, so learning anything, right? There's a cycle to this. One is to be able to exhibit what you want to achieve so she can see it repetitively. Two is codify that in whatever, so if it was a script, word for word. But like adjusting wise, if there's other adjusting teaching seminars or things like that. But three is a personal interaction and like so she watches you do it and assists you doing it. And then you reverse, you observe her and become her assistant and you can give her feedback. And then ultimately you just manage by checking in. And so with the physical adjustment, it's just a little bit different, but it's about just taking her through first, not being afraid, and then, physically looking at the setups and however you want her to adjust. If they want to become comfortable with adjusting, they can break through that in 90 days. And if they do that with the people that it's appropriate for them to do that with, it will not hurt the brand. I think you got that. Dr. Foster, are you out there? I'm not sure that he can talk, interestingly enough. Let's just unmute all. Dr. Peter, a takeaway? Excellent. That's a great takeaway. Dr. Anthony? I'm sure you're not alone, but yes, and so it's an interesting way of looking at that, right? And so you don't want to damage or even hit yourself financially. And so we just need to start from wherever you are to put that in place. And it's a great kind of, stable anchor to start from. Like, this is how we're measuring improvement, like result. Good. Anyone else that hasn't shared that would like to? Dr. Steve? Oh, you broke up, Dr. Steve. Now we can. Yes, you love Rule 1. Thank you. You broke up again a little. All right. So I appreciate all of you. This concludes Lesson 1. I have recorded it, and so I will send you links to be able to access that at any point. If you need to reach me, feel free to email or call, and I'll look forward to talking to you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Yes?